Who do I go to? Mr. Terry, for what the gentleman seeks recognition for an amendment to this title?
It is titled MPB 2593.
And will the clerk inform us whether the time
Where did you say that?
frame is,
MB2.
the time limitation
590, I see.
has been met?
It's also gasoline price increases title.
Is that okay with this council?
Ms. Davis,
Yes, it was received in a timely manner.
will you report the amendment?
Amendment to H.R. 2454 offered by Mr. Terry.
Without objection, the amendment's considered as read. The gentleman is recognized to
Good.
speak on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'd like to have unanimous consent to add 5 words after the comma in $2,009 in paren, comma, to add as a result of implementation of this act, comma.
Without objection, that'll be the order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, with this act covering all areas that emit or industries that emit CO2, includes all fossil fuels, which also includes gasoline, which is part of everyday life. It's ubiquitous to our culture. We need it to go to work. We need it to take the kids to school. We need it to move goods and services. And the studies that I've seen show that there will be substantial increases in the cost of gasoline at all grades. And what I would like to do with this amendment is to suspend the act if the price per gallon hits $5 per gallon. Now, at the current time, according to the Energy Information Administration, the current price per gallon national average is $2.29. I can tell you in Omaha, when I filled up on Sunday afternoon at the BP Amico on the corner, for the higher grade it was $2.35. So the $5 that I put in here as the trigger is double what the price per gallon is. So it has to have a 100% increase before it's triggered, and has to be the result of this act. Now, I just want to quote from one heritage study that came out this last week. Actually, it came out Monday. That is a result of the revision, the substitute that was released on Thursday, that showed that as a direct result of this act, that gasoline prices per gallon would go up 74%. So I've kind of put it on the outside of that purposely. But frankly, we all lived through last summer when gas hit $4 per gallon and the effects that it had on our everyday life. Families were making choices, cutting back on driving. I think the end result is that people started using or began using their car less, to the tune of about 15%. And it's stayed pretty static there. The heritage says that because of the increased prices, we can see another 15% drop in usage, which I'm sure is part of the end game. But it's also because of the higher prices. This is going to affect small businesses, but I'm focusing here on the family budget. They don't want price of gas back at $4 or $5. So this is to eliminate the risk It's to hedge against the huge increases that some of us feel are coming because of this act. So I would encourage all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me on this. It should be of little risk, but maybe of some peace of mind to our constituents that we are not going to allow the price of gas to go over $5 per gallon because of this act. So at that point, I will yield back the rest of my time.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. Are there any members on the majority side seeking recognition to speak on this amendment? The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've listened very carefully to the amendment, and I'm in opposition to the amendment. There's no question that America is addicted to foreign oil. That goes without saying. That is a tremendous problem that we all face. The bill that we have before us will help solve that problem. It will move us away from our addiction to foreign oil. It will help us build a clean energy, low-carbon future. And it will help America lead the world in creating the technologies for energy independence. But this amendment, as I understand it, proposes to press the eject button on our clean energy program if someone thinks that this bill has a certain effect on gasoline prices. The amendment is really just an attempt to undermine this bill. And so, Mr. Chairman, let's look at the facts. According to expert studies by the EPA, the per-gallon gas price changes that might result from putting a cap on emissions from fuel are very small, about 2 cents a year over the life of the program. Last year, and we all remember this, we saw gas prices go up by $2. And where did those dollars go, Mr. Chairman? To hostile regimes overseas that are trying to hurt our country. But for 2 cents, we can move to a clean energy economy. We can do something about the dependency on oil that chains us to the whims of OPEC oil ministers and exposes us to the price escalating effects of the growing Chinese demand for oil. We need to be a lot more concerned about the $2 a gallon increases that come from staying hooked on oil than 2-cent increases from moving off of it. Let's be clear, Mr. Chairman, an amendment like this would send a signal to American industry not to invest in developing ways to cut our use of imported oil and make our cars more efficient. And so, Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to reject the amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yield? The gentleman yield?
Yes, I will yield.
I thank the gentleman very much.
Yes.
And I can't agree with the gentleman more. If the price of a gallon of gasoline is going over $5 a gallon, that's the very reason why we need this bill. We need to create a whole new way of domestically producing energy here in the United States. That's what this whole electric vehicle revolution is about. It's using renewable energy so that people can plug in this next generation of vehicles at home. It's why we're putting so much money into carbon capture and sequestration, so that coal can play a role in generating low-carbon electricity, so that people can plug in their car at home. We right now are in the eye of the storm. $4 a gallon gasoline a year ago. Now, it helped to induce a recession, from which we are now recovering. The price of a gallon of gasoline went up 7 cents last week. We don't have a lot of time to put in place a plan that avoids sending us back to where we were last spring at $4 a gallon, much less $5 a gallon. This is our opportunity to put in place a plan for the future. That's what this debate is all about. It's about green energy jobs, but it's about energy independence. We produce 8 million barrels of oil a day in the United States. We import 13 million barrels of oil a day. OPEC has us where they want us. OPEC can increase the price of oil anytime they want on us because they are the marginal supplier of oil to us and to the world. That's our weakness. Our strength is that we are the technological giant on the planet. Our strength is that we have a chance here to put together a revolution in renewable energy fuels, in electric vehicles, that will break our dependence upon oil and drive down dramatically the amount of oil that we import, and as a result, dramatically reduce the likelihood that we will see the dramatic spike that we saw in oil prices last year. That's really what this whole debate's about. We don't want to see the price of gasoline go over $5 a gallon, but if it does, that only reinforces more the need for this legislation, more the need for us to put in place a way that we use our technological genius. And it only reinforces more why it was so important what happened on the White House lawn today, where the President, with all of the auto company executives, announced that their goal now is not 35 miles per gallon by the year 2020, but now 35 miles per gallon on average by 2016. That's the kind of action we need to take. We need to use our technology to reduce dramatically. The auto executives are on board. The auto executives are saying they want to move towards this electric vehicle future that we have included in this bill, but we have not seen the understanding of the depth of this problem yet.
Will the gentleman yield?
The gentleman from North Carolina.
Yeah.
Well, it's my time, and I believe it has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butterfield. I appreciate that. All I was going to do was ask you to provide me the site on that EPA statistics.
I'll get my staff to get it to your staff, sir.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very supportive of the Terry Amendment. My question would be, how many U.S. industries do we want to bankrupt in one markup? The automobile industry is on its knees, and this announcement today that they've accelerated the CAFE standard mandate from 2020 to 2016 is not going to make the automotive industry more robust. We've already got one in bankruptcy, Chrysler. You're probably going to have General Motors in bankruptcy within the next month or so. Bless their heart, Ford Motor Company, which didn't take advantage of the loans, didn't ask for the loans, is apparently in strong enough shape that it doesn't yet need federal assistance, and I would emphasize yet. Now we have an amendment by Mr. Terry for the refinery industry. Mr. Green and Mr. Gonzalez, and maybe others, I don't know, but I know those two have been working like Trojans to get some allowances for the refinery industry. And my understanding is that they got 2% for 2 years beginning in 2014. Now that may be erroneous, and they may have done better than that. But the Terry Amendment simply says if gasoline prices go above $5 a gallon because of this act, and keep in mind that right now they're a little over $2. They've been as high as in California several years ago. They were up over $4. The average in the country was a little below 4 before they declined. But if they go back over 5, we'll suspend this act. Now, we keep being told that nothing that the majority is doing is going to cause price rises anywhere. We're somehow going to defy the laws of economics, and we're going to have a cap on CO2, man-made CO2, that starts, I think, in the first year at a little over 4 billion metric tons, goes up for a couple of years, and then over the next 30 years declines down to about 1,000 million tons, or 1 billion metric tons. But somehow no prices are going to rise anywhere. Now, we learned from counsel that these allowances that are given to the local distribution companies, somebody's going to buy them, but that's not going to cause a price rise anywhere. So all Mr. Terry is doing is saying in something that for most Americans is a basic necessity, gasoline that they use to go to work, to drive their families to school, that the commercial sector uses to provide gasoline and diesel for trucks and all this stuff, that if you guys are wrong and prices do go up, once gasoline reaches $5 a gallon, we're going to suspend the act. That's an insurance policy. That's a price cap. If we can put a cap on carbon, we darn sure ought to be able to put a cap on gasoline prices under this bill. It's beyond me that we can't accept this amendment, because if there are very few people in the United States that don't use gasoline in their cars or trucks on a daily basis. And this, to me, is one of the more important consumer protection amendments. I strongly support it and hope that that we would adopt it. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to yield back.
Great. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank my friend from Texas, referring to Congressman Gonzalez and I as working like Trojans. My worry about, though, is this amendment might be that Trojan horse that will sack the city. I have to admit, I've sat in Congress for a number of years and watched gas last year go up to well over $4 a gallon around the country, maybe even $5 a gallon. But I didn't see any amendment like this that all of a sudden said, okay, let's start doing different things. This amendment only says that if we get up to $5 a gallon, then including taxes, then we're going to not worry about carbon sequestration. I guess we could say the same thing about benzene and other things that that we have. That's what worries me, that this amendment will put an artificial barrier on it, when frankly that gas could go up to $5 a barrel based on the world market for crude. And that's where it was almost last time. I think California may have been close to $5 a gallon last time. I know in Texas we were at, $4. And I tell people, even though we have refineries all in my district, we don't get a discount, except for our state taxes are just a little bit less than maybe other states. But that's why this amendment's not a good amendment. It sets one issue up, and it's interesting for my colleague. Price controls is something when the Republicans had majority for 12 years didn't want to talk about. And now, because we're talking about carbon sequestration or environmental issues, we're going to talk about $5 a gallon. And again, that's why I think that we may get $5 a gallon even before this bill is effective, and what's going to happen to our constituents at the same time. What we need to do is not import 60% of our fuel, or our crude oil, and produce it domestically, or have alternatives on how we get around the country. And hopefully this bill will get us to that point.
Will the gentleman yield on that point?
Be glad to.
So how does this, can you show me the provisions in here that allow us to develop America's great energy reserves?
Oh, I've been frustrated with that for many years, but last Congress was the first time in a Democratic Congress we took off the control of outer continental shelf drilling. Oh, geez. Okay, I've been there. But
no, the question was in this bill.
The
question was in this bill, because
I don't know of any wells off the Oregon coast. But let me reclaim my time. We had that battle last year, and this Congress, a Democratic Congress and Senate, did away with the moratorium. But
and the
Republicans
president
were in control for 12 years, and we never talked about it. Never talked about it. Never got a bill out. We did get a bill out of the House. Maybe we even got it out on ANWR, but the Senate wouldn't pass it. So, but that's why I don't think this amendment is ingenious in drafting. But and Congressman Gonzalez and I have been working to make this bill work for all of the country, and not just the coast, and also the Gulf Coast. But that's why I think that gas may get to $5 a gallon next year, and it may not have anything to do at all with cap and trade. Maybe we ought to provide this where we suspend everything if it gets to $5 a gallon.
Gene, will you yield for 1 second?
I'll yield.
I added some words that said as a result of the implementation of this act. So it wouldn't be because of world pressures. It would be as a result of this act.
Well, Lee, and that gets to the point, if $5 a gallon is so bad, why shouldn't we do that for everything, including
if you would agree to
make that amendment, we might accept.
Yeah, Gene, I'll do
that
unanimous
amendment.
consent for $3, $2.50.
Mr. Green, would you yield, if I may?
Yield back.
Who else?
I would. One of the arguments in the bill.
We do drink wine in Texas.
We'll do that. We'll talk about global warming. One of the bragging points on this bill was going to reduce our reliance on foreign oil. So I don't see the price of gas going up to $5 because of whatever happens on imports.
Well, my argument is that 60% of our oil right now comes from imports. And so it's a world market price on crude. And if $5 is such a major issue because of carbon, why don't we make $5 for anything? And for any reason it goes above, because our folks couldn't afford $4 last year, and but the market did come back down.
The point I'm making is that the bill was it was supposed to eliminate our dependence on foreign oil, so I don't see it going up to $5 for that, if that's indeed the.
I'm hoping it does, maybe 10 years from now or so, that we will see less foreign oil imported. Of course, at the same time, coming from where I do, I want to also see more domestic production.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Are other members seeking recognition? The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is this amendment kind of speaks to why Republicans and Democrats have really been talking in dual universes. And it talks about, and I really have great respect for Mr. Markey and his impassioned approach to this debate. But this whole markup, why we're having such a hard time, is the basic premise of climate change, and to fix it, you're going to charge for carbon, and we're saying that that additional cost for carbon is going to affect constituents. It's going to affect ratepayers. It's going to affect gasoline. Now, in the debate of energy security, which is what Republicans stand for, we want an all-the-above energy portfolio. We wanted the Outer Continental Shelf, and I'm glad my friend Gene Green lauded the opening up of the OCS, but that was a Republican victory because of the Republican energy protest. It wasn't because the Democrat majority wanted to open up the OCS. And if everybody wants to debate that with me, I'll be happy to debate that. That's what we did because we had an approach that we wanted lower gas prices. We wanted our consumers to pay less. We wanted to have people not burdened by high energy prices. And who gets killed the most? There are 102 counties in the state of Illinois. I represent parts of 30. It takes me 3 hours to drive from one part of my district to another. That's small town, that's rural. We have big trucks. You've heard me say this all in the last Congress. We have big trucks. We have working trucks. We have to drive long distances to schools, to health care, to buy groceries. We're not from the rich parts of this country. And what this bill is going to do is hurt the poor, rural Americans who rely on low-cost fuel to get from point A to point B. 2 cents a gallon increase for a year? You have got to be kidding me. And if it is 2 cents a gallon, then you shouldn't mind this amendment. But this is another safety insurance policy that says to our voters, to our constituents, that if your gas prices go up to $5 because of carbon, we're going to amend this act. I think that's a good bet because, and if you believe what you say, this amendment does not hurt you. If you represent rural America, where they drive big trucks to work, you need to support this amendment. If you have people that drive long distances to school, to health care, to get groceries, travel 3 hours to get from one point of the district, but if you live in suburbia and you have mass transit and you're from the wealthiest districts of this country, then this isn't going to affect you. That's why this is an important amendment. I will support it. I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Are there other members on the majority side seeking recognition to speak on this amendment? The gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to congratulate the distinguished ranking member. He said that the auto industry is on its knees, and this is true. The auto industry is on its knees, but a large part of the reason is that they insisted on building gas-guzzling cars. Well, now they've got religion, and they're going to build more fuel-efficient vehicles. But the fact is that gas prices are volatile. They're going to spike. And if Americans burn less gasoline, the prices on average will be less. If we don't pass this bill, prices will be more volatile if consumers are going to get hurt in a periodic fashion. Another point I'd like to make is that if gas prices do go up to $5 a gallon, it's going to be very difficult to distinguish the market forces from the forces of regulatory impact. So I don't think this amendment makes sense. I think it's going to hurt consumers. It's going to keep gas prices volatile, and I urge my colleagues to vote against it. I yield back to the chairman.
Okay, gentleman's time has expired. Are there other members seeking recognition? The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm not aware of a study yet that shows passage of this bill will reduce the cost of energy. If somebody has one of those, I'd love to see it. And so what it really amounts to is a national energy sales tax. And people are going to pay more. It's just a question of how much more and whether there are any emergency exits off this high-speed freeway that this bill's on. And I think that's what troubles me most. Like my colleague from Illinois, my district's 70,000 square miles. I wish it only took 3 hours to drive one direction across it. Now, I happen to, here in Oregon, drive hybrids on both ends. You can't put a trailer hitch on a Ford Escape hybrid. They don't allow that. Okay? It's physically impossible, I guess. I tried. They rejected me at the dealerships. They can't put it on a hybrid. So as you develop all these new cars, and we've seen some of them on display out here, the three-wheel electric one and this and that, understand there's a whole bunch of America, rural America, that still needs workhorse trucks to haul workhorses and to haul cattle and to haul the other commodities that feed people all over the globe. They're going to pay more. They're going to pay a lot more. There are some on the other side of that I simply don't like people that drive big trucks. Big diesel dually trucks. You hate them. I don't know you hate them individually, but as a class, you want them all in small, fuel-efficient something or others that may not actually do the job. And as a result, we're going to have people, they're going to lose their jobs. And I think that's what troubles me most about this. I hear a lot about the green jobs. The study out of the University of San Juan Carlos in Spain, from their experience, showed for every green job they created, they lost 2.2 other jobs. National Association of Manufacturers says you're going to lose a couple million manufacturing jobs in America. And a lot of the green jobs are being created out there, and they're in my district, and I don't have anything against renewable energy. I'm actually a pretty big advocate of it. But a lot of them are just installing the windmills, and then you leave. So a lot of the initial jobs are in installation, and then they're gone. What we lose permanently are the manufacturing jobs. Now let's turn to energy. Because the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Markey, made the point about how we need to use technology to develop all these new renewable biofuels, and we're going to have all this new renewable biofuel. And I have repeatedly, some of you may have noticed, talked about woody biomass. Woody biomass, I've got people in my district, scientists, engineers, all the kinds of people that we think America is all about, trying to turn woody biomass into renewable fuel. And they can do it. And when they do it, if that wood comes off the federal forests, you all in the energy bill in 07 said it doesn't count as renewable fuel. I tried to change that in my amendment, and you gleefully voted down. The chairman of the subcommittee, who on one hand says we got to have new energy, new renewable biofuels, get off petroleum, on the other hand votes down the very amendment that would incent woody biomass to be converted into a liquid fuel source and count as renewable biofuel towards the nation's renewable fuel standard. Somebody explain to me how you can have it both ways? How can you have it both ways? You can't. But what you are going to end up with is an enormously expensive cost on Americans that are struggling. When it comes to the rebates on energy, we're just reading through this bill. Looks to me like you just socialize the rebate program and then stick it to anybody that still uses energy as if they're evil. And I don't happen to believe that's the case, because a lot of manufacturing uses a lot of energy. But you're not going to, your make work pay tax credits and things are distributed evenly, even though, as my colleague from Tennessee has pointed out pretty clearly, and the data show, the energy costs aren't distributed evenly. Some regions of the country, actually mine, probably aren't going to get hit as hard by higher energy as a result of this national energy sales tax bill. as other regions like the Midwest. And even in the Northwest, it depends upon how much of your power comes from hydro. And yet even hydro is discriminated against in this bill, and it's probably the most renewable, carbon-friendly energy on the planet. But, oh, try and install new hydro if it affects the elevation of the water behind a dam at any location or time, it doesn't count? Can somebody explain to me how that suddenly makes the hydro non-renewable? And why you put that in your legislation? Anybody? You can't answer the question because there's no logical answer to it. It's politics. The deals have been cut, and the bill's before us. You can change it, though. There's still an opportunity. We'll have amendments to make it better.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes himself. And I do want to point out that we can have differences of opinion. We can think that there may be different consequences from policy decisions we make. But I don't think it's fair to attribute to one side of the aisle or the other hatred for any one class of people or people who work for a living. And especially, I don't think it's fair to Democrats who have always fought for working people. I must say, I just take exception to the idea that you would say the Democrats hate people who drive trucks. Now, this bill is attempting to make sure this country's national security is protected. So we're not dependent on having to bring in oil from countries that do not wish us well. We want new economic development in this country, and we think we'll get it from the legislation that we are offering. You can disagree with that. You can disagree with it. I don't have any problem with that. And you can offer amendments. And in fact, this amendment is the same amendment that we've already voted on at least 3 times. If China doesn't have a bill equivalent to ours, the whole legislation's out the window. If electricity prices go up too much, the whole bill's out the window. If gasoline prices go up too much, well, the whole bill is out the window. I think you're making a point, but I think you're making the point in a way that we ought to move on. The point's already been made. I just think that we ought to be very careful how we talk about each other's opinions and recognize that we do have strong differences, but it doesn't mean that there's some in this committee, Democrat or Republican, that like one class or dislike another class. Every time anybody says we ought to do something for working people, I always hear people say, "Oh, those Democrats are engaging in class warfare." It's not appropriate as part of the debate, and I would hope members would refrain from that. I yield back the balance of my time, and I'll recognize the gentleman from Arizona, higher seniority, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we have been debating whether or not this legislation will raise the cost of energy here in America, whether it's electrical energy or gasoline, as we're debating right now. Somehow, it seems to me that Mr. Murphy said it quite correctly earlier, and that is that it's pretty clear that what this bill does is it imposes additional costs on energy, on the emission of carbon dioxide. Currently, the emission of carbon dioxide is free. This imposes additional costs. The notion that it is not going to raise the cost seems bizarre. It seems to me a little bit like an Alice in Wonderland world. The entire goal, I submit, to raising the cost of carbon dioxide emitted when energy is produced is to raise the cost of that energy and to discourage the consumption of that energy so we produce less carbon dioxide. I don't see how in anything other than an Alice in Wonderland world you can have it both ways. It seems to me the President of the United States, a very eloquent gentleman, was very candid. He said bluntly during the campaign that the costs of energy were going to go up and going to go up dramatically. Indeed, I thought that was the purpose of this legislation. And during one of the hearings that we had on this legislation, I believe we had a panel of somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 or 13 witnesses. I asked them a series of questions. One of the specific questions I asked was, do each of you agree that the passage of this legislation will cause the cost of energy to go up in price to the consumers? And the answer from each and every single one of them was yes, it will. Indeed, that was the design. Now, I understand that through negotiation, rebates have been negotiated or adjustments have negotiated, and there's an attempt to offset or to cushion those increases and to cushion them with regard to certain industries which have overseas competition or which produce excess carbon compared to other industries. Indeed, I spoke with Mr. Doyle. He said they carefully crafted it to protect 41 different carbon-sensitive, import-sensitive industries. The point I want to make is there'd be no point in negotiating those kinds of soft landings or those kinds of offsets if indeed the cost of energy weren't going to go up. The second point I want to make is the point I made to him at the time, which is what happens to industry number 42? We negotiated rebates or soft landings or adjustments for 41 industries, but what if we missed on industry number 42? There's a report from Heritage dated yesterday, written by several of their scholars, William Beach, David Kurtzer, Karen Campbell, and Ben Lieberman, all of which analyzes this legislation and talks about electricity rates rising by as much as 90% after adjusting for inflation, a rise in inflation-adjusted gasoline prices by 74%, a rise in residential natural gas prices by 55%, a rise in the average family's annual energy bill by 1,500%. It seems to me that it's pretty clear that the goal of the legislation is to increase energy prices, to discourage the use of energy which produces carbon dioxide, and to encourage us to move to other fuels. How can we sit here in the room then and say, well, these things aren't going to go up? Gasoline prices won't go up, electricity won't go up. I don't understand how we can have it both ways, and I don't understand how we can say that we're going to make everybody whole with taxpayer-funded rebates. And I agree with the gentleman, we should refrain from personal comments, and I happen to have a Ford pickup truck. It's not a dually, and I don't think the Democrats in my district dislike my Ford pickup truck, but I am deeply worried about the impact of this legislation on my pickup truck driving and on all the other pickup truck drivers, and for that matter, on all of the other people in this nation who have to pay for their energy prices. And quite frankly, I do think it is a valid point to say that when you raise energy prices, you do disproportionately affect those who can least afford it. At least in my district in Arizona, people drive till they can qualify. What that means is that the lower income people in my congressional district have to drive way out of town from their jobs to find a home that they can qualify for. They drive older cars, they drive less fuel efficient cars, maybe not after they get to rebate their car and turn it in, although I'm not sure $4,500 will let them all turn in their car, and they drive longer distances, and I think we're kidding ourselves if we do not think this will disproportionately affect those Americans. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Rogers. Did you seek recognition?
Yes, thank you.
Gentleman's recommended.
I was a little bit surprised, and it's maybe not the sense that we're frustrated, Mr. Chairman, but we're frustrated. And it's some of the things I heard even said in the debate, in this argument, in this debate, tells me that we're just two completely different places on something that we think we could be common ground. I mean, we've got our own bills to reduce the dependency on foreign oil, brings clean options, but it has to have everything. It has nuclear, clean coal, wind, solar, biomass, all of it. And this bill picks winners and losers for that, and it picks winners and losers for families and winners and losers for businesses. And when the subcommittee chairman said that where the recession is out, we're out of the recession, I think he actually used the word recovered, there was 539,000 jobs lost last month. And that tells me that maybe in Washington, D.C. we're doing fine, but I'll tell you, back home, people are hurting, and they are hurting bad. And if that isn't the continuation of a recession, I don't know what is. 539,000 job losses? And he made a valid point. He said, if when prices got up to $4.50, it accelerated our recession, put people out of work. Absolutely it did. So all we're saying is, hey, let's not go down that road again. We've been there. We've had families lose everything because of it. Let's put a little insurance chit for the person who gets up in the morning and has to drive, on average, 40 miles to work. About 40 miles. That's the American average. And when we do that, we're investing in their ability to have a home. This is a social contract of which you are all violating. And that social contract was, listen, we know that if we provide an incentive in the tax code, you can go out, buy your own home, and own your own home, and you get to pick the neighborhood. And if the schools aren't good, you ought to be able to try to move around and find and have that ability to have that little white fence and that grass in your yard and raise your kids to the standard of which you want. And if that means you have to drive a little bit further, you make that choice. You make that choice. But what you're saying is we don't want you to make that choice anymore. You don't get to pick your schools. You don't get to pick that house with the white picket fence. We know better than you because we're pretty darn smart. We're members of Congress. That's what you're saying. And the gentleman from California absolutely didn't take 1 second to understand the car industry. Not 1 second. The only cars that the big three, and by the way, the foreign companies who were coming into the market here were making lots of money on were pickup trucks and SUVs and minivans. And what was the big investment from our foreign producers who came into the markets by building, say, a big truck plant in Texas? It was a truck plant because they made money doing it. So we ought to be just honest about what we're saying. We're saying is we're going to tell you, America, what kind of cars we want you to drive. I don't know if that makes us feel better or not. But matter of fact, you mandated to these car companies that they had, in order to meet the formula, they had to sell a certain number of small cars, even if they didn't make money doing it. How are we doing? Oh, that's right. One's in bankruptcy, one is on its way, and the other one is on its last leg. And, oh, by the way, our foreign competitors aren't doing very well either. This has huge impact to somebody that has no control over what's happening in their lives right now. They have got to get up tomorrow morning, and they got to fill up their car, and maybe it's a minivan because they got 3 kids, and after work, mom is going to take somebody and drop them off and pick up their neighbor's kids and get them to soccer camp or get them to the cheerleading school, and, oh, by the way, she's going to get groceries and come home and cook dinner, all of which we've now made more expensive for her in her average daily.
Will the gentleman yield to me?
I would absolutely.
What are you doing for those people that have to spend a lot of money on gasoline? You're going to make the bill go away so that people who have jobs developing renewable fuels lose their jobs. The people that are working on making houses more efficient, they'll lose their jobs.
I'll reclaim.
We all ought to be together on this, not trying to play one up.
I understand, but let me reclaim my time, Mr. Chairman. I understand your point, but the point is we have provided a great opportunity to unleash American innovation, and we've already seen that against Europe, we beat them with American innovation. This bill abandons American innovation. And we ought to say, let's do it all. We deserve to honor that social contract for those families who made those choices. I'm not talking, they're not living in big houses.
Would the gentleman yield? How have you unleashed a great ingenuity for American, as you just claimed?
And all of the above energy plan, Mr. Chairman, and we've got several that
we haven't even seen that yet. Please share it with us.
It's in the Republican alternative.
We have it in the Republican alternative, Mr. Chairman. You'll have a great opportunity to either pick American innovation and saving the folks who are struggling today, or this big government mandate that didn't work in the housing industry and it didn't work in cars, but somehow it's going to work in your electric bills.
I would ask unanimous consent that the gentleman be given 1 additional minute.
Without objection.
Would the gentleman yield to me?
I would yield.
I'd like to ask a question of the distinguished chairman, since it's the 3rd or 4th time that you said that these Republican amendments that we're offering repeal the entire act. Would the gentleman accept the Terry amendment if we amended it to only suspend Title III of the Act and let everything else stand? Title III is the cap-and-trade portion that's going to cause all the price increases.
Well, that may or may not be true. Price increases in gasoline have gone up enormously over a year ago, and we didn't have cap-and-trade in place. What we had was a world market that went way up. What we have is a lower price now because of a world economy that is going quite downward. So why we should suddenly stop the limitation on carbon emissions, stop the limitation on carbon emissions if the gasoline prices go up, what we ought to do is try to make sure that we minimize the cost of while at the same time we limit carbon emissions.
Reclaiming the last 1 second, I assume the answer to that is no, then.
That's correct. Your time has expired as well. Further discussion on this amendment?
Mr.
Chairman.
Let me see who wishes to speak on the amendment, because I think we've got a pretty clear idea of it. Mr. Gingrich, I'm going to call on Mr. Upton first because he's senior to you. So the two of you, and then I would like to then put the matter to a vote. Mr. Upton first.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may not use all my 5 minutes, so if someone on our side wants a little time, perhaps that'll happen. I guess it comes down to this, the frustration that I share with Mr. Rogers and really with Mr. Dingell and Mr. Stupak, too. Our state is really hard hit. And as I look at our region, the reliance on coal, the reliance on the auto industry, the jobs that we lost, particularly in Indiana, that we share that same thing, Ohio, Illinois, we are in real trouble. And with all the hearings that we had over the course of the first couple months of this year, I kept hearing that there's really no economic harm, little or no pain. This was going to be a good thing for the consumers, and it might be as little as even less than a postage stamp in terms of the additional costs. And we'll accept that if it's true. But if it's not true, we want an insurance policy. We want an off-ramp, is what it's called. And that's why Mr. Rogers offered the amendment that he did. China and India, if they don't comply, just like the EU, they want us to come up with the same scheme so they don't lose jobs over here. So we had that debate for a long time, and it failed. But tomorrow we'll come back to it again, because I have one of the amendments that's going to be filed is that they don't comply within 5 years. It'll be lifted. We'll get the off-ramp. We had a long discussion on Mr. Blunt's amendment. 10% increase in electric costs. We're told in parts of our district, parts of our region, electric costs may go up by 40 or 50% almost overnight. That amendment failed, but tomorrow we'll have another amendment along the same lines. Maybe it'll be 50%. And if that fails, maybe it'll be 100%. We're going to find out where that bar is. I'm going to have an amendment maybe later tonight if we have time to cap it at 10% unemployment based on this bill. I can tell you that in most of my counties, we wish we had 10% unemployment because we're way over that. And so is Michigan. And that's where our fear is. Now, last year, we had a big debate on oil prices, and I supported Mr. Stupak's amendment on price gouging. We had a big bill back in 2005. It was a bipartisan bill led by Mr. Barton with Mr. Dingell's support. And when that bill got to the floor, we had dozens and dozens of amendments. And there was one amendment that was defeated that would have provided incentives for more refineries in this country. One of our concerns, knowing that the price of oil is driven by supply and demand, is that we have both, that we can use the OCS, the Outer Continental Shelf, that we can have additional conservation efforts, that we can look at new sources of oil, whether it be tar sands or oil shale, coal to liquid, a whole number of different things. And we also have the refinery capability. It wasn't always that we had to import refined oil. We do today. And one of our concerns is because of some of these requirements that are in this bill that we're going to send some of these refineries away from our shores. They're not going to be in Mr. Green's district. They're going to be in some other country. And what happens then? If it increases costs as a result of this bill to more than $5, we're going to make some changes. So, again, this bill, this amendment follows the same line as the other amendments. We're going to find out where that bar is. And if it's not $5, is it going to be $7? Is it going to be $8? At what point do we tell American consumers enough is enough? I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Mr. Gingrich.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And actually, my comments are very, very closely aligned with the gentleman from Michigan. And the point is, at what point would you agree, would the majority agree, to sunset this plan, at least, as the ranking member said, Title III of the plan? Is it if it's not 10% increase in electricity prices for the average American, is it 25%? If it's not China and India cutting down on their carbon footprint and pollution as much as we do? Is it 50% of what we require of ourselves, or even 25%? At what point do we reach that sunset? And I agree fully with Representative.
Would the gentleman yield? Would the gentleman yield for a question?
I will. I'll yield in just a few minutes, Mr. Weiner. Let me make my point. When the Democrat majority occurred and Ms. Pelosi became Speaker in January of 2007, she was the first witness before the Science Committee, a witness of one. We were not really, we on the minority side were not permitted to ask her any questions, and her signature issue clearly was this cap and trade and global warming issue. Several weeks later, former Vice President Gore presented before the Energy and Commerce and Science Committee a joint hearing as a witness of one, shortly after receiving the Inconvenient Truth documentary Oscar award. And it was the same thing, and it was clear, and it's clear to me today as I listened to comments from Mr. Markey a few minutes ago when we talked about the price of gasoline, average price at the pump, getting up to $5, and his remark was, well, that's the whole point. You know, that's what, it was almost like he was saying that's what we wish for, because at any cost, we're going to a green technology, and we're not going to use any fossil fuel, and I think that is ridiculous. Ranking Member Barton made the comment that, well, how much destruction are you going to accept in this economy? How many bankruptcies of how many industries before you throw up your hands and say this is not working? And there has to be a point at which we are willing to look at that, and I'm not seeing that here. It's almost like we're going full speed ahead no matter what the devastating effect on the economy might be. The hell with that. We've made up our mind. It's going to be a green economy and green jobs. I call them subprime jobs. And we're going to wean ourselves off fossil fuel no matter what. And oh, by the way, we're not going to allow any drilling off the outer continental shelf. We're not going to utilize shale because it causes one scintilla increase in carbon dioxide footprint. This is crazy, and I think that this is the whole, Mr. Chairman, the whole viewpoint from this side of the aisle. There's some good ideas. We need an all-of-the-above energy policy, but not green at any cost to the total exclusion of any fossil fuel. And with that, I will yield to my friend from New York.
I thank the gentleman for Georgia. I think the problem is we have different ways of calculating the cost. Would the gentleman agree that the present amount of money that we American citizens are pumping into the pockets of Ahmadinejad in Iran is unsustainable? Would you agree that our support of the Saudis by our dependence on fossil fuel is unsustainable? At what point does that reach so high that you say, I'm going to vote yes on this bill?
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Weiner, I do agree with that. I do agree with that. And we can solve that by the all-of-the-above energy policy that we talked about for a full month, the month of August last year, while maybe a lot of people were on vacation.
Will the gentleman yield to a question?
I'll be glad to yield.
Do you personally, you yourself, have a copy of that amendment? The all-of-the-above plan?
The all-above plan, I absolutely do.
Would you mind if I won't share it with anybody. Would you mind if I see it? I'd like to see that. I mean, let's bring it up here. Let's have a discussion of it, because right now it seems like a fairly
reclaiming my time, I think, Mr. Weiner, you will have an opportunity, and I'll yield to the ranking member.
Well, we need to be honest here. We're not under oath, but I think it pays to be honest. The Republican alternative that I introduced last week has the all of the above in it, but that particular the production incentive package is not germane to this committee. And so the Republican alternative that we will bring to the desk sometime tomorrow or Thursday, depending on how the markup goes, will not have that in it unless the chairman is willing to rule that it's germane to the markup. Because if we brought it up, with non-germane amendments, the entire alternative could be ruled out of order. I'm just being honest. We've got it. It's been introduced, but the Republican alternative that we're going to put at the table will not have that in it because our production incentive stuff is not in the jurisdiction of the...
Would the gentleman yield, or can I strike the last
Well,
word?
well, my time, I'll reclaim, but my time has expired, and
But we'll share it. I can share it with you.
Gentlemen will be given an additional 1 minute so you can conclude your dialogue.
I guess the reason I raise it is we've now had repeated attempts at basically the same amendment with some variations of what triggers the bill being stopped. And in several occasions, this alternative has been referenced. It might be instructive for us to begin that discussion. Let's see what the alternative is, and we'll have a discussion of the alternatives. At least that is moving what you seem eager to talk about onto the playing field so we can consider it. Germaneness, non-germaneness, it's not what you're going to eventually offer. I think now might be a constructive way to move forward. We've basically seen the outcome. The votes are pretty clear on this thing. You've made the point, but you've referenced this, all of the above. Let's bring it. Let's take a look at it. Maybe you'll win some Democratic votes, and we can start amending that as the base bill.
Time is up.
I don't know how you...
Now we will proceed to a vote on the, whose amendment?
Terry.
Mr. Terry's amendment. All those in... Well, I think we've completed the discussion. And I've asked members to respond who wanted to speak on this. And if I'd certainly be happy to have you have 2 more minutes, but I don't want that to be used as an excuse for another round here.
No, I understand.
Well, without objection.
All right, Mr.
Without objection, the gentleman will be recognized for 2 minutes, and we will then proceed to the vote on the pending amendment.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I appreciate you.
That'll be the order.
Mr. Chairman, you remember when Secretary Chu came here to testify, and I asked him this question. I said, Mr. Secretary, last September you made a statement that somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe. Well, at that point, the levels in Europe were $8 a gallon. So when I hear this debate, I'm reminded that the Secretary of Energy agrees with you on your side that even if the cost of gasoline goes to $8 a gallon, this will be good because this will force Americans to cut back on gasoline, and I don't know how they're going to survive because your bill does not have the diversification and the transition so that these people can make it. Well, as it went further in this debate, the Secretary went on to talk about how economic climate would change and it would be completely unwise to increase the price of gasoline, he admitted. But he'd like to reduce the price of gasoline, but he says it could go up. And he mentioned alternative fuels, forms of fuels, biofuels that can lead to separate source or independent source of transportation. So I pressed him a little bit and I said, well, you don't really, honestly, in your heart of hearts, think that the American people will be satisfied with $8 a gallon? And he said, well, honestly, no, I don't think so. But I pressed him further and I said, well, don't you think it was really silly for you to even talk about that huge amount of expenditure here in America to follow with Europe? And he said, yes, I do. So I think my point is, Mr. Chairman, the Secretary of Energy at one time thought $8 a gallon. We're talking about $5 a gallon. And I'm saying from this perspective, if it's not just your members, Mr. Chairman, it seems to be the administration has the concept that it's okay to go to $8 a gallon to force Americans to somehow sacrifice. So with that in mind, I sort of substantiate some of the statements we're saying on this side, which we're repeating again and again, which is basically, you folks don't seem to care how expensive gasoline gets, because in the end, you think it's all going to be solved by solar cells and wind, and you don't even recognize there has to be even a bridge, a transition. So I think in that respect, Mr. Chairman, I think the point's well made. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. We'll now proceed to a roll call vote on the pending amendment.
Mr. Waxman?
No.
Mr. Waxman? No. Mr. Dingell? Mr. Markey? Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Boucher? Mr. Boucher, no. Mr. Pallone? Mr. Pallone votes no. Mr. Gordon? Mr. Rush? Ms. Eshoo? Ms. Eshoo, no. Mr. Stupak? Mr. Stupak, no. Mr. Engel? Mr. Green? Ms. DeGette? Ms. DeGette? DeGette votes no. Mrs. Capps? Mrs. Capps votes no.
He didn't know it. He just sort of.
Mr. Doyle?
He sort of.
Ms. Harmon?
He's like.
Ms. Harmon votes no. Ms. Schakowsky? Ms. Schakowsky, no. Mr. Gonzalez?
That's good.
Mr. Gonzalez, no. Mr. Inslee?
That's his whole
Mr. Inslee, no. Ms. Baldwin?
We get round.
Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Ross? Mr. Weiner? Mr. Weiner votes no. Mr. Matheson? Mr. Matheson votes no. Mr. Butterfield? Mr. Butterfield, no. Mr. Melanson? No. Mr. Mr. Melanson votes aye. Mr. Barrow? Mr. Hill? Mr. Hill votes no. Ms. Matsui? Ms. Matsui, no. Mrs. Christensen? Mrs. Christensen, no. Ms. Castor? Ms. Castor, no. Mr. Sarbanes? Mr. Sarbanes, no. Mr. Murphy of Connecticut? Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Space? Mr. McNerney? Mr. McNerney, no. Ms. Sutton? Ms. Sutton, no. Mr. Braley? Mr. Braley, no. Mr. Welch? Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Barton? Mr. Barton, aye. Mr. Hall? Mr. Upton? Mr. Upton, aye. Mr. Stearns? Mr. Stearns, aye. Mr. Deal? Mr. Deal, aye. Mr. Whitfield? Mr. Whitfield, aye. Mr. Shimkus? Mr. Shimkus, aye. Mr. Shadegg? Mr. Shadegg, aye. Mr. Blunt? Mr. Boyer? Mr. Boyer, aye. Mr. Radonovich? Mr. Pitts? Mr. Pitts votes aye. Ms. Bono Mack? Ms. Bono Mack, aye. Mr. Walden? Mr. Walden, aye. Mr. Terry? Mr. Terry, aye. Mr. Rogers? Mr. Rogers, aye. Mrs. Myrick? Mrs. Myrick, aye. Mr. Sullivan? Mr. Murphy of Pennsylvania? Mr. Murphy, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Ms. Blackburn? Ms. Blackburn, aye. Mr. Gingrey? Mr. Gingrey, aye. Mr. Scalise? Mrs. Scalise, aye. Mr. Hall? Mr. Hall votes aye. Mr. Dingle? Mr. Dingle votes no. Mr. Gordon? Mr. Gordon votes no. Mr. Green? Mr. Green votes no. Mr. Doyle? Mr. Doyle, no. Mr. Rush? Mr. Rush votes no. Mr. Barrow? Mr. Barrow votes aye. Mr. Space? Mr. Space votes aye. Mr. Ross? Mr. Ross votes aye. Okay.
Any other members wish to be recorded? Any member wish to change his or her vote? Any Republican wish to change his or her vote? How about the Democratic side? If not, the clerk will tally the vote.
On that vote, Mr. Chairman, the ayes were 25 and the nays were 31.
25 ayes, 31 noes. The amendment's not agreed to.